Welcome back to Market on Close. I'm Alex Coffey. It's now my pleasure to welcome in our next guest. It's the Chairman and CEO of Applied Digital, Wes Cummins. Wes, thanks so much for taking the time and joining me here on this Tuesday afternoon. I know you got exciting news, and I can't wait to get to that. But for those who, maybe are living under a rock and aren't familiar with your company, I know it's getting harder and harder not to be if you're following AI. Can you give us the elevator pitch of sort of what you guys do?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Alex. So what we do is we design, build, and operate what we call next generation digital infrastructure. And this is high power density data centers primarily that are really built to run AI workloads.
As someone who grew up in the Midwest, born and raised in Nebraska, I see obviously the North Dakota data center is obviously a huge part of your recent announcement. Talk to us about this leasing deal that you just announced with Coreweave, another really major player kind of in this grand ecosystem of AI build out. I know you work closely with companies like NVIDIA and AMD as well. Talk to us about this announcement and what it means for your company.
Yeah, so this announcement, 250 megawatts of critical IT load on our Ellendale, North Dakota campus. This is a campus that we started developing back in 2022, and we started building the current building in 23. This lease includes 2 buildings on our campus, total value around $7 billion for the first 2 buildings. There's an option on a third building that would increase that value up to $11 billion of that contract. And this is a 15-year contract, and this campus is really designed, it's purpose-built for AI infrastructure workloads. So this will be, one of the largest campuses in America with a lot of near-term power coming online. This was done, so for Alex, for you from Nebraska, I'm from Idaho. We built this in a town of about 1,100 people. We really worked with the community there, a lot of renewable energy that oftentimes doesn't get used. So this is stranded power that we're putting to a great use by running these AI workloads in a location where, typically you don't see these types of jobs and this type of opportunity available. But it's one of the unique features of these workloads and where we can take it, which is to the source of power rather than typically these things are deployed in population centers across the U.S. and across the world, actually.
And Wes, I imagine one of the draws to an area like that is that maybe land is of abundance. If you do plan additional expansions, which I'm sure is sort of in the roadmap, you'll be able to do so much easier than in maybe more urban communities that are sort of built out. Is that kind of the idea?
Land is the easy part there, but the real draw, number one, is power. So there's a significant amount of power. We co-located next to a substation there that has roughly 2 gigawatts of wind power that feeds into that substation. And then when we talk about stranded power, there's not enough transmission capacity when the wind is blowing necessarily to move that power out to a use purpose or a use case, a load. And so that's number one. Fiber connectivity is number 2 for us. So this actually in North Dakota, a lot of cross-country fiber routes run through there. And number 3 for us, we love this Dakota's region of the country. It's a cold region. When you're running big workloads like this, when you're using this amount of electricity, it allows us to cool. The cold region allows us to have a much more efficient data center, runs our PUE, which is a measure for data center close to 1. It lowers our electricity consumption versus what it would be in southern states. And that in turn lowers our cost for our customer, which is driving costs down, which is really what you have to do on a technology curve of any new technology. And so we're really pushing this region, and we think it's a great region for AI infrastructure.
Amazing. And as we look ahead then, and we kind of take big picture, obviously your company is playing a major role within this AI transition that we're watching take place. And as someone who has, kind of a front row seat to how this is all playing out, not to, kind of ask you the kind of boring question of where do you think we are in terms of the baseball innings. But when you look at this space, do you feel it is still relatively early stage in terms of continued AI build out and ultimately where this entire, Internet 2.0 AI is ultimately going?
Yeah, so let me give a couple of perspectives on this. So just from our front row seat, where we're talking to these customers, so we really target hyperscalers,
Right.
and Coreweave is a great customer for us at this location. But we target what are really just a handful of companies that will use really large scale campuses like this for training and inference. So from that perspective, we're seeing still really high demand. We're seeing it from most of these customers as they drive for both additional training capacity and inference capacity, which is growing even faster. So that's from my front row seat. But then when I look back at the stats, this year, the first part of the year, the first 4 or 5 months of the year, really the first 4 months was, I would say, a really negative news cycle for AI. We had DeepSeek in January, and there was a lot of questioning around data center boom to bust, these types of items. But the things that didn't get really talked about were what we're seeing from the stats inside the use case here. So let's just look at ChatGPT, which is the number one app here, and ChatGPT from December until May grew, added more than over doubled its users. And then ChatGPT also in the month of May started getting over 1 billion queries a day. So that number, to put in perspective, that's about 2.5 years after the launch of ChatGPT, and to compare that to Google, so Google hit 1 billion queries a day about 11 years after their launch. So the adoption curve is huge. I was reading, there's different articles or different studies about this, but one of the number one use cases of ChatGPT this year is therapy and self-improvement. And so that the number one use case last year was idea generation. So when you move to that type of use case, to broad audience use cases, the usage is going up. You're seeing that in the numbers. It's up, I think, 10,000% from a query perspective year over year. So this adoption curve right now, just looking at the statistics, doesn't really look like a curve. It's a kind of a straight up line, and we're seeing it really hit mass market. And there's just a lot of momentum behind these applications and the users adopting it, and whether it's ChatGPT or Grok or Anthropic, we're just seeing the adoption rate really accelerate in the early part of this year.
Wes, final question. You mentioned kind of the DeepSeek, the overcapacity concerns that maybe kind of plague this space, maybe a quarter ago, just temporarily in terms of some of the performance of some of the stock prices. But as you know, you work primarily with these hyperscalers that are constantly seeming like, pedal full to the floor here, trying to win this race. Despite maybe some of those concerns, are you seeing any signs that those companies are willing to tap the brake and risk perhaps falling behind some of their competitors?
Yes, I think for the most part, all of the companies are being fairly aggressive. I would say, some of the headlines we've seen this year, you see a rotation around where certain hyperscalers or large companies push really aggressively, and then they'll have a digestion period. And you're seeing that, with some of the news flow that we've seen late last year through early this year. But the piece that I would keep in mind for this market, like one news headline or one company or two companies don't make the market, but there's a really small amount of companies that utilize a huge amount of the capacity. So, when one slows down and maybe another speeds up, it makes great headlines. But what we're seeing overall in the market is the just very aggressive demand from hyperscalers to go out and secure more capacity and build more data center capacity. I don't think there's anything really of scale left for 25, and we're probably already out to the second half of 26 to get any kind of meaningful data center capacity. So despite a lot of those headlines, we don't really see that in our business and in the market with our customers.
Wes, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me here on this Tuesday afternoon. Congratulations on the announcement and the successes of you and your company, and we look forward to talking to you again soon and seeing where things are progressing. That's Wes Cummins, Chairman and CEO of Applied Digital.